All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, tomorrow is World Water Day, and I will be joined here shortly by Banu Nupane, the process coordinator for the UNESCO World Water Development Report, who will talk to you about the report. The Secretary General is about to leave Brussels. Earlier today, he was in Leuven, where he accepted an honorary doctorate given to the United Nations by the universities KU Leuven and UC Louvain. In his remarks, Mr. Guterres said that by bestowing this honor, the universities are sending a message of support for the mission of the United Nations, a message of solidarity to all those working to make it real, and a message of inspiration for us to keep up the fight. He said the university's 600th anniversary coincides with a moment of reflection for the United Nations, which marks its own 80th anniversary as an organization at the epicentre of multilateralism. Standing here in Europe, the Secretary General added, we know the same commitment to multilateralism is the beating heart of the European Union, a powerful reminder of our shared responsibility to the world's most vulnerable people, and proof that isolationism is an illusion, never a solution. Turning to the situation in Gaza, the Secretary General renewed his appeal for the ceasefire to be restored, for unimpeded humanitarian assistance to be reestablished, and for the remaining hostages to be released immediately and unconditionally. His full remarks have been shared with you. This afternoon, the Secretary General also had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Belgium, Bart De Wever. I believe the readout of that meeting has just been made available. The Secretary General will be back in the office on Monday morning. Sigrid Kaag, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process ad interim, briefed the Security Council this morning on Israel and Palestine, and she said that hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. She strongly condemned the reported ill treatment of hostages, as well as the fact that there are reasonable grounds to believe that hostages may be subjected to sexual violence and abuse. Ms. Kaag unequivocally condemned the widespread killing and injury of civilians and the destruction of civilian infrastructure in Gaza. Nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, she said. She mourned the UN staff killed in Gaza and strongly condemned the killing of all humanitarian personnel and called for the full investigation of all such incidents. The Special Coordinator reiterated her call for a sustained ceasefire and urged the parties to redouble efforts to end human suffering. She rejected the forced displacement of the Palestinian population from any part of the occupied Palestinian territory, which would constitute a grave violation of international human rights and humanitarian law. Ms. Kaag added that the escalation of violence in the occupied West Bank is deeply troubling. Alongside the rising death toll, Palestine refugee camps in the northern West Bank are being emptied and are sustaining massive infrastructure damage during Israeli operations. Turning to Gaza's humanitarian situation, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that as hostilities continue across the Strip, the Israeli closure of all crossings for incoming cargo has entered its 20th day, the longest shutdown since the 7th of October, 2023. As a reminder, the crossings were also completely closed for 2 weeks starting on that date. This latest closure is having a devastating impact on people already facing catastrophic conditions. Each passing day further erodes the progress made by the UN and our humanitarian partners during the first 6 weeks of the ceasefire. Beyond the depletion of stocks, OCHA warns that humanitarian operations are now being severely hampered by hostilities. Civilians, including aid workers, and civilian assets have come under attack. The UN is seeking concrete assurances for the safety of our staff and operations in Gaza following the killing of 6 UN personnel and injury of several others this week, including in the attack on a clearly designated UN compound. As Tom Fletcher, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, said Wednesday, we demand answers on their behalf and for those who continue the work. As attacks continue across multiple areas of the Gaza Strip, OCHA warns that the steady flow of trauma injuries is putting even more pressure on an already shattered healthcare system. Our humanitarian partners estimate that more than 120,000 Palestinians have been displaced once again this week, driven by intensified attacks and new Israeli evacuation orders across the Gaza Strip. That's about 6% of the surviving population. A new evacuation order covering areas in northern Gaza was also issued today following reports of rocket fire by Palestinian armed groups. And turning to the West Bank, OCHA has just released the findings of a rapid survey of movement obstacles across the occupied territory. It recorded nearly 850 checkpoints, gates, and other physical obstacles, the highest number documented in any of the 16 surveys OCHA has conducted over the past 2 decades. In just the past 3 months, 36 new movement obstacles have been established, most of them following the announcement of the Gaza ceasefire in mid-January. Road gates account for a third of all obstacles, and most of them are frequently kept closed. Philippe Lazzarini, the Commissioner General of the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, noted that today marks 60 days since Israel began its military operations in Jenin camp in the West Bank. He said that such large-scale militarized operations cannot become the new norm in the West Bank. This trend of escalating violence, which started even before the 7th of October 2023, must be reversed. OCHA adds that it has received just over 4% of the roughly $4 billion required to meet vast needs across the occupied Palestinian territory in the West Bank and Gaza this year. Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that clashes continue in parts of North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri. In North Kivu province, fighting continued yesterday in several areas of Walikale territory, damaging a humanitarian partner's logistics base and other civilian infrastructure. We and humanitarian organizations in the area have relocated staff to Kisangani in the neighboring province of Chopo. In South Kivu, people from Burembo and Fizi Center have fled fighting among armed groups in several waves since the 5th of March. And in Ituri, clashes in the town of Fataki yesterday continued to displace people. Since the 18th of March, many humanitarian partners have suspended their activities there due to the ongoing insecurity. OCHA reiterates that all parties to the conflict must uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure in military operations. Turning to Sudan, today the UN Children's Fund has condemned in the strongest terms the looting of vital humanitarian supplies from al-Bashir Hospital and Jabal Alia in Khartoum. These supplies are intended to support malnourished children and provide critical health care to mothers and newborn. The al-Bashir Hospital is one of the last functioning medical facilities in Jabal Alia. UNICEF had managed to deliver these critical supplies on the 20th of December 2024, marking the first successful humanitarian shipment to Jabal Alia in over 18 months. The looting of these supplies will compound an already dire humanitarian catastrophe for children and families in the area. We reiterate our urgent call for an unimpeded humanitarian access to reach children and families in need, and we call for the protection of hospitals and other civilian infrastructure in line with international humanitarian law. Our peacekeeping colleagues in South Sudan have an update on the intensive diplomacy that's underway in the country. The Special Representative of the Secretary General and head of UNMISS, Nicholas Haysom, is working with international and regional partners, including heads of state, the African Union, and others, to try and de-escalate tensions and stop the aerial bombardment of civilian areas in Upper Nile State, which could spill over into wider conflict. Mr. Haysom is also engaging with influential national partners to promote a peaceful resolution. He's urging the parties to adhere to the ceasefire and peace agreement and to resolve tensions through dialogue rather than military confrontation. Mr. Haysom stresses that the already troubled region cannot afford another war. And in fact, on Monday, our guest will be Nicholas Haysom, and he will join us virtually to brief on the situation in South Sudan. Today, in Ukraine, authorities and our humanitarian partners confirmed that hostilities across multiple regions killed a dozen civilians and injured many others, with widespread damage to homes. In Odessa, a large-scale drone attack injured children and damaged shops, warehouses, and vehicles. Most casualties were reported in the Donetsk region, while in the Kharkiv region, local authorities report intensified hostilities and disrupted electricity in Kupiansk town and neighboring villages. Yesterday, the humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Matthias Schmal, condemned an attack in the central Ukrainian city of Kropyvnytsky, in which children were among many civilians injured. Apartment buildings were also damaged. Mr. Schmal stressed that international humanitarian law is clear. Civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected. Amid relentless hostilities, evacuations from high-risk areas continue, with scores of people leaving frontline areas every day. Humanitarians are supporting the most vulnerable, especially families with children and people with limited mobility, through medical evacuations, psychosocial support, and basic items. Most evacuees have remained within their home regions, while some have been relocated to central and western Ukraine. OCHA reports that in the first 2 months of the year, 7 humanitarian staff were injured in 6 separate incidents near the front line. Attacks also damaged humanitarian assets and facilities in the Kharkiv, Odessa, Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv, and Sloviansk regions, further hampering the response. Turning to Haiti, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the recent United States funding freeze is having a devastating impact on the overall HIV response, including treatment and prevention. UNAIDS says that as a result of the freeze, most pre-exposure prophylaxis services, also known as PrEP, which are key to reducing HIV infections, had to be suspended, affecting 80% of interventions. The National HIV Program estimates that at least 35,000 people living with HIV and receiving antiretroviral treatment are being affected by the freeze on USAID-funded health services. The program also foresees an increase between 30 and 50% in new HIV infections in the absence of prevention activities. HIV/AIDS affects an estimated 140,000 people in Haiti. The health sector, as part of the broader humanitarian response, needs $43.5 million to address the urgent needs for healthcare services and support to vulnerable people in Haiti. The government, World Health Organization, and UNAIDS are exploring alternatives to ensure that health services can continue. And today we have multiple international days. It's the Day of Days, as we call it. Starting off with the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. In a message, the Secretary General says that the poison of racism continues to infect our world. He urges everybody, including business leadership, civil society, and ordinary people, to take a stand against racism in all its forms. Today is also the International Day of Nowruz. In his message, Mr. Guterres says that Nowruz celebrates new beginnings and the arrival of spring. Today is World Down Syndrome Day. People with Down syndrome need support to live and be included in the community like everyone else. Today is also World Poetry Day. On this day, we celebrate one of humanity's most treasured forms of cultural and linguistic expression and identity. And moving on to environment-related days, today is the World Day for Glaciers, and coincidentally, this year was declared the International Year of Glaciers Preservation. And if that's not enough, today is also the International Day of Forests, and the theme this year is Forests and Food. Tomorrow is World Water Day, and the theme this year is glacier preservation. Our guest will be here to talk more about this, but I just want to mention that in his message, the Secretary General says that glaciers may be shrinking, but we cannot shrink from our responsibilities. And Sunday is World Meteorological Day, and the theme is closing the early warning gap together. So those are all the days. Anything before we go to our guest? Yes, Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. Does the Secretary General have any comment on the Israeli Defense Minister's announcement ordering an increase in and intensified military operation in Gaza?
This is completely contrary to what the Secretary General has been calling for days. And even today in Belgium and in the previous days, he's said repeatedly that what we need is to get back to a ceasefire. In what I've just read at the first part of this briefing, it's clear that all of our efforts to help the people of Gaza are at a standstill as long as this goes on. There are millions of people who need for this to end now.
And on Sudan, with the government forces claiming they're back in the presidential palace in Khartoum and other areas, is Mr. Lamamra going to make any kind of a fresh effort to bring both sides together for peace talks?
Yeah. On that, regarding Mr. Lamamra's efforts, he continues to engage the parties with the aim of bringing them closer to a peaceful resolution. He's intensifying consultations with the parties and other key stakeholders on modalities to strengthen the protection of civilians and to de-escalate the conflict. A sustainable resolution to this devastating conflict can only be achieved through an inclusive political process. And from the Secretary General's side, I can say that the Secretary General, renews his appeal for the parties to immediately cease the fighting and take steps towards the lasting peace that the people in Sudan demand. Benno.
Thank you, Farhan. There has been quite a number of stories of people that were either denied entrance to the United States recently or have been arrested and deported or tried to being deported. I want to focus on these last cases. In many cases, they were not based on actual crimes, but the authorities said the people were parts of protests that they deemed as anti-Semitic or dangerous for the United States security. Do you have any comment on this ongoing situation in the United States?
I think it's important that all of the basic rules in terms of dealing with entrance into the United States, including migrants, including refugees and others, follow the accepted norms of international law. And part of what you're saying is that there are many cases where people were moved without sufficient due process, and it's important that everyone's due process rights be respected.
Do you see that there is an implication for free speech in the United States, especially when we see the Columbia protests and other university protests last year? Does the UN have a opinion or a standpoint if pro-Palestinian protests are also anti-Semitic protests at the same time? This is how the US government obviously portrays it right now.
Well, certainly for us, it's important that freedom of speech and freedom of peaceful assembly be protected. So obviously, if there are expressions of racial hatred, of actual anti-Semitism, those are things that authorities need to respond to. But that shouldn't impede the rights of people to conduct peaceful protest. Yes, Dennis.
So there are reports that head of UNCTAD, Rebecca Greenspan, will head to Moscow. So when will she go to Moscow, and what is her program in here?
Yes, I can confirm that Rebecca Greenspan and her team will have their next consultation in Moscow on the 24th of March. That's part of regular consultations to discuss the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding between the UN and the Russian Federation on food security.
So will she discuss alleviating sanctions from Russian fertilizers, so easing the access of Russian fertilizers to world markets?
I think I'll wait for the discussions to take place before we provide more details. But like I said, it'll concern the various aspects of the Memorandum of Understanding. Yes, please.
Thank you. Do you have any update on the condition of the UN staff who were wounded in Gaza and their whereabouts? Thank you.
They're receiving hospital assistance. As you know, there were 5 people who were injured. One of them was lightly injured. 2 of them, I believe, have remained in intensive care, and their condition is being monitored, and we hope that they will all recover.
Could you help us with the nationality of the 2 who remain in intensive care, please?
I believe we'll provide those details further down. The hiring organization, the UN Office for Project Services, I believe is in touch with the respective governments and family members at this stage. Benny, I think you have a question online, and then we'll go to Ephraim. Are you there?
Thank you, Farhan. The ban on UNRWA, it's been a few weeks now since it entered into effect. How would you say it is being felt on the ground so far?
It's affected the ability of UNRWA staff to move in and out in terms of getting visas for UNRWA personnel. But to the extent that UNRWA is capable of going about its work, including in Gaza and the West Bank, UNRWA continues to go about its work. And if Benny, are you online?
I have a question, Farhan. Can you hear me?
Hear you. Hear you. Hear you. Hear you.
Should I go ahead? Farhan, I want to ask you about the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital in Gaza, which was built by Turkey, and it was actually operated by local authorities as a cancer treatment center. You may have seen images online. It was completely blown up by Israel. And Israel argued that it was being used by Hamas. But in fact, you may recall that after the 7th of October, there were also many images that showed Israel deploying many military vehicles around the hospital. So I would just like to ask you, why is there no mention of this in your briefing today? I mean, have we become so accustomed to Israel blowing up hospitals that we don't need to bring it up? And does the Secretary General have a reaction to this hospital being blown up? Thank you.
Yes, on that, we certainly are against any of the attacks on medical infrastructure. All attacks against medical infrastructure by any of the parties is a violation of international humanitarian law, and we stand opposed to this. And we have reported, as you know, regularly on the fact that all of the hospitals in Gaza have sustained at least some damage over the course of this conflict. And that is an intolerable situation for the suffering population. And with that, let me go to our guest.